Thank you, Ginny, and welcome all. It's wonderful to see such a great crowd. We are thrilled today to have Glen Formica here to get us all started in doing some very important work. As you know, our support team model really has two components. We provide wraparound support to the immigrant client and family for the duration of the case, but we're also heavily involved in doing investigation, documentation, and research to help out the volunteer lawyers. And that strategy is critically important because one of the objectives of the project is to increase the number of attorneys who will take on these cases. And one way we do that is relieving the attorneys of a lot of the burden that they would otherwise have. And Glen will talk to you soon about how critical the research part is. What we want to do today is not turn you all into instant lawyers, God forbid. What we do want to do, though, is have you leave here with just a basic knowledge about how to conduct country conditions research and produce a report that would be directly useful to the attorney with minimal rework that can be put into a filing. So we're going to walk you through Glen will walk you through at a very high level what that entails. We also, as part of that, hope you'll understand when you might want to bring in someone with specialized knowledge because of particular conditions that need to be investigated, such as a serious medical problem or someone who belongs to a religious sect or something like that, where some expertise would be of assistance to you in your research. We will be providing, Glen's going to show you sources for doing this research, and we will provide you electronically a bibliography with links, as well as a template for your own report. So that'll come out electronically. And again, if you haven't signed up, please do so. That we'll circulate the sign-up sheet again because we'll need your email address for that. We are planning, we'll talk about it at the end when we get to next steps, we are planning a follow-up for those who want to do this work seriously. So there will be an opportunity to come back for a working session, hands-on session, where we can share some of what we've learned, some of the problems we've had, and talk about how we can move towards the development of a more formal archive or brief bank of country conditioned reports that'll be available to all of the 6 cooperating projects that we now have, Meriden soon to be the 7th, I think. So we're very excited about that. Without any more preliminaries, let me turn it over to Glen to get us started.
I just want to thank everyone for coming. For those of you who don't know me or we haven't met, my name is Glen Formica, and I'm among other practice areas, an immigration attorney for the past 20 years. The one thing I want to just share with you before I dive into some very specific and practical knowledge about country reports and casework with a lowercase c, is that in 20 years of working with immigrants, and the reasons I came to immigration law were very personal and very client-specific. I never intended, ever, to do immigration work. I thought I'd be a nice LL Bean lawyer and do property law, and I'd have a golden retriever and a house in the woods. And I fulfilled those two things. I have a golden retriever, a house in the woods, a beautiful family. But I never thought I'd be doing immigration law. And I came to immigration law while I had started my practicing law in DC, and I ended up in Cheshire, Connecticut, because there was a firm back then, Fazone, Bailey, Ryan, and Seedale. And they primarily did real estate law, and I did some real estate litigation. And one night, a Franciscan priest walked in and had an Eritrean boy who was his nephew. Back at that time, 99, Ethiopia decided to go into Eritrea briefly and caused a lot of disruption and famine and so forth. And from that Franciscan priest walking into my office where I knew nothing about immigration law, kind of the way you're walking maybe into this room, I sat down and started to figure it out. And I had to, because I had this Eritrean kid, I had a Franciscan priest, and I thought, I can't tell the priest no, and certainly can't tell the kid no. I knew absolutely nothing about immigration law. It was as foreign to me as anything. It had nothing to do with real estate. But because I cared, and once I got to know the client, the kid, I figured I'll just learn what I need to learn to get him through this. I'll just solve it. And upon reflection, I think that's kind of how this project kind of works. I don't expect that any of you know anything about immigration law. And once you meet the people involved, from your various backgrounds, I think, and we've seen over the past 9-10 months, can't believe it's only been that amount of time, people just figuring it out and solving it. So first thing I would tell you is you don't need to be a lawyer and you don't need to know immigration law to do this work and make a meaningful impact. I certainly didn't, and quite honestly, 20 years later, I still have days where I feel like I don't know the law at all. It's a very arcane, backward, upside down system that kind of feels like criminal law, but really isn't, you know, because you don't have any of the protections. Finally, what I would say to you is just seeing this room packed like this, I still kind of have to take a moment and think I'm dreaming. Because up until 2 years ago, I think there was always concern about immigration, but nobody would fill a room. I mean, I'd be lucky if I got 2 people to join me for coffee. And then they would say, oh, you're such a good person. That's so good for you. I'm glad you do that work. Anyway, so thank you all for being here. And kind of like I started back with the kid from Eritrea, I think you all figure it out. I just want to say one side comment about Nellie's case and how sanctuary, you know, she was able to come out of sanctuary. I have a certain view on why ICE is acting the way ICE is acting in Connecticut, but I have an instinct, having worked with ICE up in Hartford for 20 years, that they don't know what to do with you guys. They don't know what to make of you. And I believe they're a little worried that you may be able to get them fired or demoted. And I think they're responding. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other groups involved, ULA, and certainly ICE is responding to them. But you're new to the scene, and I do think your impact is considerable. So don't ever underestimate the power of gray hair. All right. So jumping into our, or the lack of hair, jumping into our outline, I think most of you know who immigrants are, right? They're people who are not from here, who may have come to the United, or who are here seeking either permanent residence or citizenship. There's a big difference between permanent residence and citizenship. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds today because I really want to get into the outline on country reports and specific tasks, but just giving you a very general overview. Immigrants are either refugees who are fleeing South America, Middle East, Asia, wherever the United States, and I'm not going to have a political view on this, generally, oftentimes places where the United States has been involved politically. So we see a lot of immigrants coming from South America. When you get to know the immigrants and you really start to dig into their stories, they're coming from areas of turmoil. Believe it or not, immigrants don't just decide, hey, I'll have a better life and I'll move to America. There are oftentimes causes and influences that would cause them to leave their homes, their communities, their children, knowing they may not see their children or their parents or their friends for a very long time by leaving. But they're doing it for either an economic imperative or because they fear for their lives or the lives of their children. So refugees fleeing are oftentimes fleeing political wars from the 70s and 80s that still have effects on their local communities. Now, I really just want to be clear, I'm not talking politics. This is the foundation to understanding country report research. Because you need to think about where the person is coming from in its totality. And that's sort of the beginning point of research, understanding where they're coming from. And then you're going to pull in and connect with the history, the political events, and their personal background and put that together in a very targeted explanation of whatever their claim is. And we'll get to that in a moment. So refugees are people fleeing political turmoil, war, or upset. You also have people who come in on visas with permission and overstay those visas for one reason or another. Sometimes it's because there's family here, there's personal circumstances. Sometimes it's just because this was a way they could enter the country without having to come across the border. Sometimes it's because they fall in love. A lot of different reasons. People who come in with a visa actually have opportunities to adjust status in one of generally two ways, or really one way. Family. So if you come in on a visa and overstay and you have an immediate family, you can remain in the United States. If that family member qualifies. Who qualifies? So if you're a child over 21, you can petition for your parent, biological parent, and bring them in. And if they entered on a visa and overstayed, they can stay. If you're a wife or a husband, you can petition for your spouse if they came in on a visa and overstayed. There's some other circumstances. Again, this is not 5,000 feet. This is a 10,000 foot view of immigration law. And at another time, I could go into more details. I just want you to understand generally some of the statuses that people are in. So again, it will tie into what you're doing with country research. But that's it. It's not like somebody can vouch for him. I often hear people say, well, he's a good person, or she's a great, mother. She should be allowed to stay. That's wonderful, but, parent or child. Yeah?
What about employers?
Just literally jump, no, good point. And everybody should interrupt and ask whatever questions they want. The idea is to have a discussion. Employers really can't do much because our arcane employment system, if they overstay the visa, they're subject to a 10-year bar.
Employers can't sponsor them?
Can't sponsor for them. But I get that question every day, routinely. He's a great worker. Why can't I sponsor him? Even if certainly if he entered without permission across the border, or she did, employer can't touch him. If they enter and overstay a visa, an employer can't touch them. So there's really no way to do it through employment. Generally, employment falls into some categories, and those immigrants would be categorized. Yeah?
Is there a distinction between visas, like work visa versus travel visa?
There are distinctions between visas, and again, 10,000 feet, not 5,000 feet. Employment visas, temporary work visas, people often come in on H visas, H-1Bs, technology, 50,000, you have to have a bachelor's degree or higher, 25,000 masters, 75,000 total. So those are the most common work visas. Sometimes people come in on other specialty visas, like a J visa for training purposes. If you overstay those in certain circumstances, you can adjust if you fall in love or have immediate family, but that's it. You can't, if you overstay that visa, you're subject to a 10-year bar.
When you adjust those, are they again for a finite period of time? And you overstay that as well?
No, when you adjust to permanent residence. So permanent residence, and then you become a citizen. But when you overstay, you're subject, and this will be kind of the last overview.
Yeah, could I just say two things?
Yeah.
One is, could you repeat questions, because Al just has got you mic'd and nobody else.
Oh.
And second, can we please all agree that we're going to let Glenn get through his presentation? Ask questions only to clarify something you don't understand about what he said. We'll have time at the end for broader questions, and we'll bring him back weekly if we have to.
Yeah, I should make full disclosure. If anybody's standing in front of me and has a question about immigration, I just can't help myself. I really can't. I'm just going to, take the oxygen that I'm given to breathe. But just to finish out a general explanation on immigration, visas and so forth, what limits people's ability to remain in the United States is a 10-year bar. In 1996, Clinton triangulated to get an immigration bill passed. That triangulation ended up putting in place 10-year bars for people who are here without permission. It's called unlawful presence, or are deported. And they're 10-year bars that run concurrent. If you're here unlawfully and then deported, you still have the two 10-year bars, but they run at the same time. There are certain waivers, very difficult to get. The other issue that came down was increased limitations and bars for people who have certain criminal convictions. And it's not murderers, they're barred for life, effectively, aggravated felons, but you'd be amazed at the level. So what happens with a lot of immigrants is they enter unlawfully. Should they leave, they're subject to a 10-year bar. Prior to that, actually, you could leave, reapply for new relief, and come back in. So the triangulation in '96 was, we're going to give you an amnesty, something called 245I, which meant if you were here before 2001, you were allowed to adjust your status, even if you would come in unlawfully. But otherwise, that exception has expired because time has run out. Okay? So that's generally, and maybe at the end I can go into a little more specific with you know, some of the details on immigration. Let me just go over quickly the structure of the legal system. So just so everyone understands, 10-year bar is the reason people are so stuck with immigration status. 10-year bar, 10-year bar. It just ruins lives. It's the worst thing that ever was passed in immigration law. We have, in the immigration system, you have USCIS, and I'm going to keep this very parochial. In Hartford, Connecticut, at 450 Main Street, that's where all the immigration happens, okay? Hartford answers to the Boston field office, but that's kind of where all the decisions, major decisions come out of. Hartford, 450 Main Street, where we protest and everything else, that's where immigration happens. When you walk through the door of 450 Main Street, you turn to the left, you have USCIS's waiting area, okay? That's where people go if you've overstayed your visa, which I just spoke about, but you've married somebody or you have some other way to adjust status. There's some small exceptions I'll get into later. You go to the first floor, USCIS. They have nothing to do with ICE, okay? If you don't succeed at USCIS, they make a referral to ICE on the 5th floor, okay? 5th floor, and that's where many of you have gone to accompany people. That's where they issue a notice to appear, and that's what puts someone who isn't otherwise in removal proceedings in front of an immigration judge. So you strike out at the 1st floor, you go to the 5th floor. You're here unlawfully, ICE picks you up off the street or at your work or in your home, wherever. They take you to the 5th floor for processing. If you haven't been in the immigration process before, they issue a notice to appear and send you upstairs. Upstairs on the 6th floor is the immigration court. So we've come into the 1st floor, we have CIS over to the left, we go up the elevator, we're at the 5th floor, ICE detention and removal operations, literally to the right as you get off the elevator. They send you to the 6th floor, and that's where you see the immigration judge and you apply for relief. Now that's where country reports come into play, okay? It's at the immigration court primarily. There's some things you can do on the 5th floor, which we'll get into at the end, which is a discretionary request for stay known as an I-246, but it really is totally separate. It's very limited, you know, it doesn't involve asylum claims or something called cancellation of removal. Bennett is going to talk, I think now, about an overview on asylum and cancellation of removal. One thing I want to say to any of if there are any lawyers in the room, even if you don't have a background in immigration law, it's, you know, very possible, very achievable to learn how to do an asylum application or to do something called cancellation of removal. Bennett, in a moment, is going to be living proof of that because up until 9 months ago, he had no background in immigration law. And now I would consider him a peer when it comes to most of the relief, and I actually discuss a lot of my work by phone with him.